Hi, I'm Andrew, and I'm going to do another KeyForge deck reveal here tonight. And this is a deck that I got to use today at an auction tournament, a sealed auction tournament. And that's why I have it open in the browser here instead of, you know, properly showing you the physical cards because I don't have them. They were somebody else's, but I got to use this at the event. I wanted to quickly walk through it and talk about it. And talk about how it went. I also want to talk a little bit about how auction works out generally and my experience so far, having gone through a couple auction events, what maybe could have gone better, how the format could be improved in the future, although I do think it is a really good format, really enjoyable format. So, yeah, oh, and also figured, hey, this is a good opportunity to try doing a deck in this format. I don't like it because it's like, whoop, there's the whole deck. But there's some convenience factor too. Maybe it's a little quicker. I know my videos usually end up longer than 20 minutes. Maybe this one will end up shorter. We'll see. Anyway, so first I wanted to talk a little bit about the auction format in general and where it's good, bad, and could just be improved. If you compare, so for people who don't know, the auction format in KeyForge is a format where each player has a deck that they own. In the case of an Archon auction event, it would be a deck that you bring, that you already had, that you bring. And in a sealed auction event, everybody shows up, everybody gets a deck handed to them there. That's your deck. It doesn't matter whether you win or lose, that's going to be your deck. And then, but you don't necessarily get to play with it at that event. So you're going to go home with it, but you don't necessarily get to play with it. And then the idea is to do an auction where players bid chains for the deck that they want, and then whatever amount of chains they get a deck at, if I bid 9 chains on a deck and then everybody says, okay, pass, I get that deck for 9 chains. For every game in that tournament, we're going to do single game matches, and I'm going to start every game with 9 chains with whatever I bid. So, and whoever gets the last deck is going to get it for 0 chains for sure because there's nobody to bid against them. So theoretically, that last deck is probably going to be the worst one, assuming there's some specific order to how the decks are chosen. And that's one of the things I'll address. So if you compare auction to some of the other formats, there are a bunch that I would kind of lump into a category of straightforward. You bring a deck that you think is going to help you win, and you play it. Or in the form of reversal, you bring a terrible deck and your opponent plays it. Both of these, both of those setups have the feature that it really matters a lot what deck you bring. There wouldn't be any advantage in, a survival or triad to bringing a bad deck, or a mediocre deck even. And in reversal, there's no advantage to bring a good or mediocre deck. You really want to just bring a terrible, the worst possible deck you can bring. And they have some ways at the local chainbound level to, at least for the ones that want good decks, to sort of mitigate the effect of, that someone could have by going out and just buying a really good deck off of eBay. But that is still sort of a factor, right? If you have access to a great deck because you randomly opened it or because you went out and bought it, that's going to give you an advantage. And auction, that's much less true. At an auction format, you don't necessarily get to play with what you brought. And so, there's a bit more skill involved. You need to, it's actually, I would say, quite a lot of skill because you need to potentially, especially in a sealed tournament, but even an Archon where you have a lot of people, you need to quickly be able to evaluate all these decks and rank them against each other and decide how much you think each one is worth relative to the others before the auction starts, or be able to sort of think through that as the auction is going at least. And having an ability to do that is going to really give you an advantage. So there's a big skill boost there that I think is required for auction. And I think that also adds a little bit more fairness to the matchups. There's still randomness in the game, but there's some degree of having some say in your own destiny. You get to decide whether you bid on a particular deck or not. You can't really blame anybody else for what deck you got. Okay. You could kind of, right? I mean, if you have 16 people and by the time a deck gets around to you, it's already bid up to 15, then you didn't have the option to bid 14 on. So there's that. But it's a lot, I would say a lot more skill balanced than some of the just bring a good deck formats. Okay. Now also I thought about this compared to adaptive. Adaptive I think is the most skill-based format in KeyForge, right? You play with your deck, the other person plays with your deck, and if the same deck won both times, then you bid. And that is a little more skill-based because it's a one head-to-head. Just the two of you are involved. There's no other people involved. You could kind of get messed up in an auction format because maybe one other person made a decision that was bad for them that prevented you from having access to a deck that maybe you could have had at a reasonable price, or at a reasonable bid. So I think adaptive is slightly more fair. The huge advantage that auction has over adaptive is that it's much faster. You only need to play one game per match, and so whereas adaptive you need to play 2, possibly 3. So today we did 45-minute rounds. I felt like that was pretty generous. We definitely could have done it in 35, probably could have done it in 30-minute rounds. 45 was plenty. In adaptive, you really need to have like, hour and a half, possibly 2-hour rounds, which is a lot. So anyway, okay, that's how auction compares to other formats. All right, so now the question is, how do you handle a big group? If you have 8 people, it's very easy. Sit everybody down, give everybody a chance to look through the decks, and then just take turns. There is some question of how do you pick decks, to pick the order in which to auction decks. And I'm not sure if FFG has an official ruling on this, an official rule. I'll tell you what I think is a good idea, but I don't know if they have an official rule. Now, if you have 16 people, that's kind of a lot of people. So what the store where I did an auction, today was my second one. The first one I did, they said, well, we have all these people. I think that was actually 20 people. And so we split up into 4 groups of 5. And within those 4 groups of 5, a deck was randomly chosen. So you had 5 decks at your table. One of those was randomly chosen, and the person who actually owned that deck would be taking it home at the end of the day. That person automatically bid 0, and then the bids went around. There were a couple problems with this, and the first problem that I would say happened is that there is some variance between pods, right? We might have a pod that just generally had people that were willing to bid more than the others, and then it kind of feels bad if you bid 8 or something like that, and like maybe the lowest bid besides the 0 deck at your pod was 5. That happened today, and at the other table the highest bid is 5, right? That could happen, and that would feel kind of bad, right? You'd say, well, if we had been bidding against each other, that probably wouldn't have worked out that way, right? There probably would have been a little probably that one that was 5 that was the highest probably would have been higher, and maybe the other one would have been a little lower. It's hard to tell. So anyway, so I think that really the fairest way is to put everybody in the same pool. There's another thing that happened in that random selection of a deck to go with. I think that there's a problem there, because it's possible that through just random chance, the last deck to get picked is actually the best deck, or some variation on that, and that leads to a kind of a bad situation where the person with the best deck is playing for 0 chains, and you can see why that would be a problem. The whole point is that the best deck should probably be playing with the most chains. So because of that, I suggested today. Oh, and in the first one I played, the top 2 decks at the tournament had 0 chains and were quite good. The one that I had, which is it's one of my best 2 decks for sure, that I got to play for 0 chains. It's just a really good deck, and I shouldn't have got it for 0 chains. I don't think I was last, but nobody else bid because other people didn't see the potential in it, and I think if we'd had a bigger group, they would have. The other person just happened to randomly get theirs last. So Now today, the top two, at least three out of the top four decks were zero chains. Mine was because I got fourth. Mine was because it was the last at the table, but it was pretty arguably the worst at the table. And the other one, well, I'll come back to that in a second. So at the beginning, I said somebody was complaining about this sort of random element. I said, well, what if instead you randomly pick a person, that person chooses a deck and bids zero on it, and then that's how you pick which deck. And everybody else at the table said, okay, that's great, let's do that. We suggested it to the tournament organizer. They said, okay, great, let's do that. And somehow the other table didn't get the memo. So at our table, we had a pretty competitive bidding process. I think most of the decks went for 8 or above. The lowest was 5, except for mine, which was 0 because it was last. So we were down to 2 decks. I picked one. We bid it up to 8. The other person took it at 8. I said, okay, fine, you can have it. I'll take this one for 0. It worked out pretty well for me. I was the only one in the top 4 from my table. So I placed the best in Swiss out of anybody at my table. So I think that worked out pretty well. It was competitive. It was great. The other table, they didn't get the memo, so they were just randomly picking decks to start. And so it ended up being the case that a really good deck that had like bait and switch and a lot of other steel and decent board control got last and was for 0. So yeah, I think there's some evidence there that if you allow players to choose, the better decks will go first. They'll go for more. It's probably more fair. I also suspect there was just a little bit of variance in the tables. That our table was a little more aggressive in bidding, while the other table was a little more conservative. That can happen as well. And so, in order to fix all that, if I were organizing one of these in the future, what I would want to do is devise a way to have everybody in the same pool and have a random player each time choose which deck to bid on. We were talking about ways that we could maybe do that because, hey, it's hard to organize 16 people, have them all look at a deck. My suggestion was in our particular store, they have a screen up on the wall. If you were to, as people are registering, go ahead and take pictures of all the deck lists and cycle those through the screen, let people take a look for a few minutes as those are cycling, and then go ahead and, for each time you pick a player, they pick a deck, you put that deck up on the screen, everybody can see it, you quickly bid. It actually turns out people start passing pretty quickly, and so if you have a rule that once you pass, you're out of the bidding, a deck goes pretty fast, and so you only have to spend maybe 30 seconds probably on every deck, and it ultimately I don't think would take that long. With 16 people, I think we probably could have had the whole process done in 20 minutes, including giving people a chance to pass around and look at decks. If FFG wanted to, they could make the app facilitate this much better. You show up, you have your app, you're registered as being in the event. All the decks get registered. The TO hits a button and it chooses a player that is going to. It chooses the order in which people can bid or pass. It randomly picks a player. They have 16 decks. They can quickly look. They have a timer after which it'll randomly pick one. They choose one and say, okay, here it is. They have access for like 5 minutes before to like browse through at their own pace. That would just be fantastic. They finally it bids, like it's recorded right there. The TO doesn't have to take notes. And then when you go to sit down next to somebody, it tells you, hey, this is, Brian, and he's going to be playing with 5 chains with this deck. Like, that would be fantastic. I feel like the next thing I should say is that's a lot to ask. I actually don't think that's that complicated to build something like that. I'm in technology. I can say I don't think it would be that much work to build something like that. So, hopefully FFG decides to get ambitious and try something like that. I think it would just be great. The hard part is you're going to have you have to deal with the fact that you will not have everybody at the tournament with a device, right? So you have to have a way to deal with players that don't have a device, but I think you could probably figure out that's probably the hardest part. But if you can make it work so that if you have 80% of players with the device, they can take advantage of that. The TO can help out the other players somehow. I think that would be just fantastic. Anyway, I think there's a huge way to just be able to make that better and make it a much better, more streamlined format. And that some of that stuff could carry over and help other formats too. Okay, well, we're already 15 minutes in, but I'm going to go ahead and walk through the deck now, talk about how it did in different situations, and then we'll wrap it up. So this is the deck that I got for 0 Knots of Ghostveldt Castle. And it's funny because the guy who opened it, he was saying, oh, you don't want to get stuck with this, it's so terrible. And he was the guy who ended up bidding 5 on a different one. My first matchup was against him. It was a close game. I have to say it was a close game. I think he was right to take the other one for 5. He was saying, at 4 it probably would have made a difference in a couple games. He had another game that he lost by 1 amber. So anyway, but this one I managed to get 3 keys, and he was at 2 keys and 3 amber, so it was pretty close. And okay, so it's Brobnar, Logos, Mars, and again, mostly I was playing. Well, actually, I think so. That game I was against somebody with 5 chains. The next game I was against somebody with 0 chains. That was the really good deck that just wiped the floor with me. I didn't forge a single key, and then the next one I think was like 2 chains, and the next one might have been 5 chains. And those were both those are close, but I don't think they had their second key, or they had just got their second key by the time I got my third. So I definitely had an advantage in those, and the chains certainly didn't hurt. So okay, all right. So let's start with Brobnar. Coward's End, not one of my favorite cards. You wipe the board of damaged creatures. You kill each undamaged creature rather, and then it gains you 3 chains. Usually, I don't think that's worth the 3 chains. Tonight, with the other setup that's here, it worked out pretty nicely, and you'll see. So, Loot the Bodies with Coward's End is actually pretty nice because you're thinking, oh, I'm going to wipe the board. I'm going to kill a bunch of my own creatures. I'm going to gain 3 chains. That stinks, but hey, if you're getting an amber for each creature you kill, and your opponent just dropped 3 or 4 creatures, that's just fantastic. I had an opponent who had a Tunk. They dropped out, squawkered it, fought something, and then played another creature, so they healed their Tunk, and I'm sure they're like, yeah, that was the right move. With Coward's End coming out, and I had a Coward's End Loot the Bodies. Yeah, that made me very happy. 2 punches, this is great. I got to kill a Guardian with double punch and get 3 amber back that way. Double punch is great. Even just punches on their own are really nice. This deck, you'll see, has a lot of just direct damage along with the Coward's End. So anyway, and punch nice with Loot the Bodies. Not so good with Warsong, but nice with Loot the Bodies. Sound the Horns, gain amber, discard cards until you find a Brobnar creature and put it in your hand. That's solid. And actually, you know what? It cycles your deck. Sometimes that's scary. It's actually good. Like, I was never sad that I had cycled my deck, and I'd be discarding and see cards I hate, like Phosphorus cards coming out, and be like, yeah, that was good. Unguarded Camp. This one's really interesting. Gain an amber, and then for each creature you have in excess of your opponent, in other words, if you have 5 creatures and your opponent has 3 creatures, then this number would be 2. A friendly creature captures 1, and you have to spread it around. A creature can't capture more than 1. I don't think this won any games. The amber's nice. The capture is nice. It creates puzzles for your opponent to solve. Like I said, I don't think it won any games, but it's not a bad card. I was happy to have it. Cannon. This can do some work, especially if you're up against, shadows with a bunch of elusive. Deal 2 damage. Weird story. There was one game where I punched my mother. God, this is going to get used against me someday, this sound clip. But yeah, I used punch on my own mother robot scientist that was on the board before I did Coward's End, which you can see why, but it was funny. Okay, so yeah, cannons, good direct damage, consistent. Gauntlet of Command, always a great card. You get that out, you get to do fight with stuff. Yeah, I love it. I was always happy to have that. Fire Spitter, 5 power, 1 armor, and before it fights, it deals a damage to each enemy creature. Yeah, that was cool. It was fun. There was one interaction where I think the opponent had a phoenix something on a creature, and actually the before fight on this was enough to kill the creature because it was only at 4, and we ended up trading anyway because this my fire spit already had some damage, and so the phoenix upgrade when it did 3 damage at the end, it killed my fire spitter. But he was like, "Oh, we trade," and I was like, "Well, yeah, okay, I guess we do." Even though normally we wouldn't, because the fire spitter before fight damage would have killed his thing, and they wouldn't have actually hit each other. Ganger Chieftain, fantastic. Use this a couple times to get amber from the ready and do as much as you can. And sometimes use it to fight, and that's great too. Headhunter, 5 fight, gain an amber. That's great. I like it. Hebe the Huge, more direct damage. That was good. It was like, okay, if you don't have damage, I'll either have Coward's End or Hebe. I probably have something I can do to mess you up. All right, on to logos. Effervescent Principle. Each player loses half their amber, gain 1 chain. There is a game, I think I used this twice, because I used it once and then I cycled with Sound the Horns and ended up using Effervescent Principle again later, and that definitely gave me a big advantage. Cut them down from 8 to 4 in the second time I used it. So yeah, it's great. I mean, that can just be a really good card. The chain stinks, but it's if it's not worth it, then discard it, and it's not the end of the world. Phase Shift, great for getting your other stuff in. Maybe drop an artifact if you can. Maybe drop your Ganger Chieftain, something like that. Maybe drop a Mars thing. Scrambler Storm gains you an amber, and your opponent can't play action cards on the next turn. This is this can be really nice. It's hard to know. If you don't know what's in their hand, then you don't know if it's going to be that useful, and you probably almost certainly don't know what's in their hand before you choose your active house. So but sometimes this can be quite clutch, and yeah, it's a nice effect and gains you the amber. I'm never sad to play it. 2 Twin Bolt Emissions, gain an amber, deal 2 damage to a creature and 2 damage to a different creature. Great, again, more direct damage, ways to get rid of stuff. Nice. I enjoyed it. Library of Babel, if you can get out early, you get a few extra draws throughout the game. I usually just get unlucky and draw non-logos cards, so I almost never have this pay off for me, but it's not bad. I would always rather have archive than draw, I think. Almost always. Anyway, so it's fine. It's not great, but it's fine. Strange Gizmo, gain an amber, and when you play it, and it's an artifact, that after you forge a key, destroy each creature and artifact. This almost certainly won me the first game, because he had 2 skeleton keys out and a third one ready, and a bunch of like elusive, and then some sanctum with taunt, and it was going to be real nasty. And because I got this out just in time and got to forge my first key, it wiped all that stuff out, and including, I think, an evasion sigil. Anyway, it was going to be gnarly, and getting this out saved my butt. So, and another time in another game, I discarded it because I had like a Gauntlet of Command and a Library of Babel and stuff out, and I was like, this is not going to help me. And then the other 2 games, I think I got it after I already had my second key, at which point it's just an amber. That's all it is. Anyway, pretty good. Depending on the situation, but be willing to discard it. Dr. Escotera, 4 power, gain an amber for each forged key your opponent has, so 0 to 2 amber depending on when you get it. Yeah, it's okay. It's fine. It's nicer if it has amber printed on it. Mother, nice if you can keep it on the board. Keep an extra draw every turn. This is much better than Library of Babel because it actually increases your options before you choose your active house. So if the extra card you draw is a 4th card of the same house, then it really helps. Because Research Smoko. 2 power, when it's destroyed, you archive the top card of your deck. Never sorry to have this. Never sorry if my opponent decides that's the thing they want to kill. It's just there. And then Experimental Therapy. I got good use out of Experimental Therapy this game. I had one game where I used Experimental Therapy on a Headhunter, and then later on used Martian Hounds on it. We'll come back to that. But so there's some times where it can be an okay card. That stun and exhaust is gnarly, but sometimes it can be really good. So anyway, it was fun to see it turn out nicely where I've seen it not do that before. All right, on to Mars. Battlefleet. This can be a really terrible card because it sometimes is just gain an amber. I guess that's not that terrible. I had a couple times where it drew me 3 or even 4 cards, and that was really, and then a lot of those were Mars, and that was good. I mean, yeah, this is a case where there's so much burst draw if you can get it, is actually really nice because you're going to have a couple things you can use. So anyway, gain the amber, reveal any number of Mars cards, probably all of them from your hand, and then draw an extra card for each of those. Deep probe, nice if you can pull it off. If you can, this card, I think I've said this before, has a high skill cap. You know, if you can have a good guess at what's in your opponent's hand based on what you saw on their card and what's in their play area and discard pile, you know, you can maybe knock some creatures into their discard pile from their hand, which is going to give them a bad turn. And it gains an amber, so it's never terrible. And you get to see their hand. So usually, I don't feel like seeing a hand is that good in this game because what's in their hand is probably going to change pretty fast. But anyway, but you get it. It can happen. Next we have EMP Blast. Gain the amber. Each Mars creature and each robot creature is stunned. Each artifact is destroyed. Mostly I got to have, you know, my dog's barking. I'm going to check on my dog. Sorry about that. My dog thinks that my neighbors are serial killers. All right, so where were we? Okay, yeah. So EMP Blast. I had a couple times where destroying artifacts is great. I had another time I discarded it because I had artifacts ahead. Similar to Strange Gizmo, it's like just a bit situational, but it can be good. Martian Hounds. You play it. Choose a creature. You count up how many creatures are on the board that have damage, multiply that by 2, that number by 2, and then put that many +1 power counters on the creature you picked. So I had one game where I got to put 8 power on a fire spitter, which was pretty cool. And I think I had experimental therapy on it too. So I had an experimental therapy fire spitter with 13 power and an armor, and yeah, that was nice. So Martian Hounds can be really cool. Sometimes it's stupid, but you know, situational. Phosphorus Stars I hate. I don't even want to read it. I used it once. I did use it once because my opponent had 4 Bravnar creatures out. I had nothing but Mars out. I was putting more Mars on the board, and it was like, okay, I guess this is the situation where this is good. But out of 4 games, I used it once, and every other time I saw it, I discarded it. Psychic Network, steal 1 for each friendly ready Mars creature. That can be good. I think I got 1 or 2 steals out of it in 4 games, but mostly because I didn't see it a lot. I think it got turned over a lot by my Sound the Horns. But anyway, it can be good. It's very situational, and you need to have a deck with more Mars creatures really to make it useful. And this deck just wasn't that. Squawker, gain amber, ready a Mars creature or stun a non-Mars creature. I saw somebody, I've seen people posting and seem to like think that the stun part is the better way to use this, and readying a Mars creature seems like almost always the better way to use this. Mother Gun, artifact, action reveal any number of Mars cards from your hand and deal that much damage to a creature. That's pretty good. I've had that be very nice. Gromid. So this one, you always gotta go, man, is this the right play? So it's a 10 power creature. That means it's probably gonna stick around for a little while. It's gonna do damage, and the kicker is you can't play creatures while this is on the board. So I actually had the one time I played this, and I really wasn't thinking. Sorry, dog again. Okay, so yeah, so I played it, and I had 2 other Mars cards in my hand, and I was like, that was a wrong. But I played it, used Squawker, and killed somebody else's creature that had the Phoenix thing on it. So the Mars creatures would have died anyway, and they lost an amber. That was nice. I ended up killing it the next turn with a punch because that was the only way to get out of having another board. So you have to have a plan for getting rid of it. Because of that, you cannot play creatures. On the other hand, if you can get a use out of it, or 2 uses, maybe 3, Gauntlet of Command, Ganger Chieftain are good ways to maybe do that, get a little extra fight out of it. Then it can knock out big creatures and it makes your opponent lose 1. So it's not bad if you use it in the right situation. Sometimes you should discard it. So you just have to be willing to do that. Actually, I've said that about so many cards in this deck, right? The Phosphorus Stars, the definitely Effervescent Principle, EMP Blast, Strange Gizmo, Gromid, and Coward's End. These are all cards that could have a strong upside, but that you have to be willing to discard if that's what the situation calls for. And I feel like that's the problem with a deck like this. Why, but at 0 chains it wasn't bad. All right, last 3 cards: Mind Warper, Elusive, 2 power, action. You have your enemy capture one of its own amber. It's just so confusing to people. It wouldn't make me sad if they didn't make this card, but anyway, it's just not that exciting. And when I first saw it, I was like, oh, that's cool. But then you realize that steel is a thing that exists, and it's like, oh, that's. Ugh. Only if you have really good synergy, I guess, then it could be okay. Ixalo Bolter, 3 power, fight Reap, deal 2 damage to your creature. I didn't use that a lot. I think I used that once. So it's, situational at best. And low power, so kind of iffy there. And then Zizix the Mini. I thought this was bad. I still don't think it's amazing, but I realized it was better when I realized you can archive a creature. So if you have a creature from one of your other houses, it's fantastic because you reap or fight, you reveal and then archive that creature. That clears up space in your hand to draw more things, and you get 3 +1 power counters on here. I feel like the power counters, they're nice. They're not what makes this card good. The only thing that is nice about them is they give it a little extra staying power. So anyway, but the fight, reap, and then archive something, that's fantastic. If you get the opportunity to use that a bunch. So that's that. And yeah, like I said, it was able to really, I think what ended up helping it win in the 3 games that I won was it has the artifact control in Strange Gizmo and EMP Blast. They're double-edged swords, but if you use them at the right time, you wipe out your opponent's artifacts. Coward's End and all the direct damage, a few big creatures, gave it decent board control for creatures. So between the creature control and the artifact control, I was able to generally maintain board control. The game that I lost, which I lost really badly, I don't know that there was really an out where I could have won. I don't know that there was any sequence of cards that could have won that game, but certainly part of what went wrong was him getting a nice shadow state where he was able to be fighting and stealing and just really holding me down. He was able to keep me off of forging long enough to get to a point where he forged and then could use bait and switch. It was just gnarly. So if he hadn't had shadows, I might have had a chance. Anyway, so that's this deck, Knots of Ghostveldt Castle. It was solid middle of the road deck. Not the best deck, but definitely not a total stinker. And again, in an auction event at 0 chains, it beat all the chain decks that it played against. So that's something. And I really hope this is not to bash FFG because I really like they're doing innovative things with KeyForge and pushing the boundaries in the space. I think if they could build more of the tournament features, more of the event management features into the app, especially for auction, but also for the other events, I think that would really helps streamline things a lot. And you know, if Brad Andrews or Alex, any of those people um, end up watching this video and want to say, hey, somebody work on this, then you know I will be forever in your debt. But you know whatever, keep forging those keys and have a good day.